Well, hello again, Foothills. Today we are looking at 2 Samuel 20. And in this chapter, we're going to look at the destructive power of rebelling against authority. As the chapter opens, we see that no sooner had King David survived the rebellion by his son Absalom, and just when he was reuniting the tribes, a new rebellion rises up. Let me read the first two verses of 2 Samuel 20. Now a worthless fellow happened to be there whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjamite, and he blew the trumpet, and he said, "We have no portion in David, nor do we have any inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel." So all the men of Israel withdrew from following David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri. But the men of Judah remained steadfast to their king, from the Jordan even to Jerusalem. You know, not much is known about Sheba. This section of the Bible is the only place that he's mentioned. But we learned that he was an opportunistic man. Sheba took advantage of David's weakened position after Absalom's failed rebellion and the conflict between Judah and the other 10 tribes. But clearly, he rebelled against David's sovereignty and against David's authority. Rebellion basically is opposition to authority. While rebellion can be violent, it also can remain unexpressed. Rebellion always, though, begins in the heart. Rebellion against God's authority was humanity's first sin and continues to be our downfall collectively and individually. And rebellion has consequences. You might remember that in 1 Samuel 15, King Saul rebelled against the Lord by disobeying his direct instruction to totally annihilate the enemy of Israel, including their king, and to destroy all the plunder. But Saul spared the best of the livestock and did not kill the king, and this greatly displeased the Lord. He spoke these words to King Saul through Samuel the prophet, 1 Samuel 15, verse 22 and 23. And Samuel said, "Has the Lord as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and insubordination is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king." It's interesting that the Lord linked rebellion to other serious sins such as idolatry and divination, which is basically witchcraft. Rebellion is serious stuff, and it has consequences. Adam and Eve's rebellion brought death into the world. Saul's rebellion cost him his kingdom, and Sheba was going to pay a high personal price for his rebellion. So in verse 6, King David dispatched some of his generals and an army to deal with Sheba, because David considered Sheba a serious threat. Let me read verse 6 to you. And David said to Abishai, "Now Sheba, the son of Bichri, will do us more harm than Absalom. So take your Lord's servants and pursue him, so that he does not find for himself fortified cities and escape from our sight." Well, Sheba did find a fortified city. He ended up in a walled city named Abel of Beth-Makkah. And the armies of Joab and Abishai began a siege and were ready to knock down the gates when a wise woman appealed to Joab. Using wisdom and persuasive words, she convinced Joab not to destroy the city and that Sheba would be delivered to him. And as you read in the story, the head of Sheba was tossed over the wall. You know, high walls couldn't protect Sheba from the consequences of rebellion, nor the army who followed him. Unrepentant rebellion leads to serious consequences. We must all remember that all authority comes from God. Within human civilization, God has established a chain of command, and rebellion against God's ordained order is sin. As an example, Romans 13 instructs us to submit ourselves to the governing authorities, as long as those authorities do not require us to disobey the authority of God. And you can read about that in Acts chapter 5, verse 29. Rebellion against righteous authority leads to anarchy. In the home, for example, God's chain of authority is that the husband is to be the head of the family, and the husband's responsibility is to lead his family in submitting to Christ. And the wife is to submit to her husband, and the children are to obey their parents. Rebellion against familial authority also leads to chaos and dysfunction within the home. And God has also created order within the church as well. He has appointed elders to shepherd and keep watch over the congregation. And while pastors are never to have absolute control over anyone, They are to be honored and obeyed as much as is healthy for the church and the individual. Rebellion within the church leads to division and strife and a loss of effectiveness in carrying out God's mission. So you might want to ask yourself, is there rebellion in my life? Am I respecting the authority that God has placed in my life? Rebellion in your life may not be one that will split a nation, but it could split your marriage or your family. It could split a church or your relationship with God. If you are unsure if there is a rebellious spirit in you, I challenge you to pray this very dangerous prayer. And we find that in Psalm 139, verse 23 and 24. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there is any hurtful way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way. You know, wedged in between Sheba's rebellion and his ultimate demise is another story of rebellion with consequences. Joab was King David's general for years, and historically he was a revengeful, ambitious, self-absorbed, and self-promoting man, and he had a rebellious, murderous heart. His rebellious heart drove him to revenge. His story began when, without David's permission, he killed Abner, King Saul's general, and after Abner had killed Joab's brother Asahel. Abner also drew Joab's ire since he was trying to help King David unify the tribes. And you can read about that in 2 Samuel chapters 2 and 3. Joab again showed his rebellious heart when he rebelled against David's command not to kill Absalom, which we read about in 2 Samuel 18. He had a kingly command, but he didn't obey. In 2 Samuel 19, verse 13, King David made a decision that further fueled Joab's rebellious heart. David had assigned Amasa, his nephew and the general of Absalom's army, to replace Joab as commander of David's army. David probably did this in an effort to reconcile the warring tribes, but Joab was infuriated, and he looked for an opportunity for revenge. David assigned Amasa to assemble an army to squelch Sheba's rebellion. However, he did not act quickly enough, or he just didn't command the leadership skills and qualities that would attract fighters. So David had Abishai, Joab's brother, take over, and Joab followed. Let's pick that up in verse 7. So Joab's men went out after him, along with the Cherethites and the Pelethites and all the mighty men. And they went out from Jerusalem to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. And when they were at the large stone which is at Gibeon, Amasa came out to meet them. Now Joab was dressed in his military attire, and over it was a belt with a sword in its sheath fastened at his waist. And he went forward, and as he went forward, it fell out. And Joab said to Amasa, "Is it well with you, my brother?" And Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. But Amasa was not on guard against the sword which was in Joab's hand, and he struck him in the belly with it, and poured out his inward parts on the ground. And he did not strike him again, and he died. Then Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba, the son of Bichri. You know, every human heart has the seed of rebellion germinating deep within it. Joab allowed the rebellion in his heart to blossom and consume him, and treacherously it cost Amasa his life. Rebellion does not go unpunished. You know, King David never really addressed Joab's rebelliousness, but Joab did not get away with a life of rebellion. If we fast forward a few years, David is on his deathbed, and even though Solomon was to be king, Joab aligned his rebellious heart with that of another rebel, Adonijah, and it would eventually cost Joab his life. You know, history would record Joab as a valiant warrior, a capable man of war, and loyal for the most part to King David for years. Yet his inability to control his rebellious heart turned out ultimately to be his demise. This should serve as a warning to all of us. These two stories stress the danger of allowing rebellion to fester and grow in our hearts. Submission to God's given authority will only reap benefits, and failure to do so will reap destruction. So I hope you enjoyed going through 2 Samuel 20, family, and we'll see you next time. May God bless you.